Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Joe's Special. That's right, this amazing beef and spinach scramble is San Francisco's second most famous breakfast. What's the most famous? I'll tell you on the blog post. And no, it's not rice-a-roni pancakes. But anyway, this was invented at a restaurant in San Francisco called Original Joe's. And while there was no Joe involved in this, it was a totally made-up name. This is, by every definition of the word, very special. So let me show you how to put this together, and this is one of those dishes where you're going to want to get everything together ahead of time. And what we're going to need is a ½ pound of ground beef. Ground chuck is what they use at Original Joe's. And what I like to do is give it a little crumble beforehand. It's just going to make it easier when you throw it in the pan. We're also going to need some spinach. You can use freshly sauteed like I'm using here, or frozen works fine as well. We're also going to saute some onions, and then I'm also going to add some sliced mushrooms. Those were optional at Original Joe's. They would have cost you an extra $1 back then, but we're going to splurge and add them. And then, of course, what binds this all together, 3 large eggs. And then we're also going to put in a little bit of fresh herb, a little bit of chopped basil and oregano. And then last but not least, this gets finished with a little bit of Parmesan. So before we head over to the stove, let's go ahead and beat our eggs. So get in there with your fork and blend them thoroughly. And at this point, I do like to add the chopped herbs to the eggs. That'll make one less thing we have to grab later. And there will be zero chance we forget it, which I can't confirm or deny I've done before. So we'll mix those in. And I think we're ready. Let's do this thing. So we're going to head over to the stove, and let's put a skillet down on medium-high heat with a little bit of olive oil in there. And to that, we'll add our diced onions with a big pinch of salt. And what we want to do is give those about a 3 or 4 minute saute, you know, until they kind of turn translucent. And I know that seems to be a very popular first step around here. So we'll saute those onions in the olive oil till they basically look like that, at which point we will introduce our sliced mushrooms. Remember, that's going to cost you an extra $1, but it's worth it. We'll give those a nice big pinch of salt. We're going to kind of season as we go here. And we'll mix those into the onions, and we'll go ahead and saute that together for another, 3 or 4 minutes, maybe 5. And by the way, don't be a stubborn cook. As soon as I added these, I realized you need a little more olive oil in there. It's a little dry, so I put a touch more. All right, so don't be afraid to observe and adjust on the fly. And when this step is done, they should look something very similar to this. Basically, everything kind of softens and starts to brown around the edges. So that looks good. And at this point, we can go ahead and add the ground beef. I'm going to give it a little shot of black pepper here. We'll also probably need to add some salt later. And all we're going to do is stir that in and kind of break it up with the spatula or spoonula. You pick. And we're just going to continue to cook it stirring until it loses its pinkness. And this is only going to take a minute or two, so just keep stirring it. Keep breaking it up with the edge of your spatula. And by the way, at Original Joe's, they never browned the meat. It was just cooked for a couple minutes before they added the spinach and egg. But for an optional step, if you do want to continue this and brown it, you would get a little more flavor, and it probably would look nicer. But the problem is this is a breakfast. And who wants to wait 45 minutes for scrambled eggs? So we're going to use the Original Joe's Special Original Method, and just cook this for a couple minutes stirring until it basically looks like that. And by the way, this would be a great point to taste and see if you need some salt at this point. All right, the spinach and the eggs we're going to add to this are not seasoned. So this mixture definitely should be, and of course we can adjust later, but I would give it a taste now and see if that meat needs some salt. And then at this point I like to do one optional step. I'll turn off the heat, and I'll push all the meat to the top of the spatula, and I will tilt the pan, and a good amount of that beef fat's going to run down to the bottom, and then we'll toss in a paper towel and use that to soak most of it up. Maybe we'll leave a teaspoon or so, but that's a nice fast way to get rid of most of the fat, and you will not miss that at all, so basically everybody wins. But regardless, whether you defat it or not, the next step is to add the spinach. We're going to adjust our heat to medium, and we're only going to cook this for about a minute. We just want to heat that spinach through before we add the eggs. So just keep it moving, give it a stir, like I said, about a minute. And at that point, we'll go ahead and dump in the eggs, and we'll keep cooking, pretty much stirring constantly until those eggs are done. And even though we're only on medium here, there's a lot of residual heat from the ground beef mixture. So those eggs are going to cook pretty fast. So just keep everything moving. And in a relatively short time, you'll go from something that looks like raw eggs to something that looks like this. But when it comes together like that, you pretty much want to stop. If you overcook this too much, you will get liquid that starts getting squeezed out of the eggs. And then I'm not going to show it, but of course, before we plate this, you're going to taste this for seasoning. The only way this is not going to be amazing is if it's under-seasoned. So please check for salt. And once we're totally happy with how it looks and tastes, we'll go ahead and serve it up on a warm plate, of course, with a grilled tomato and some buttered sourdough toast. The final touch is a very light dusting of Reggiano Parmesan. And I probably should have told you earlier, but this is just one portion. Oh yeah, 3 eggs and a ½ pound of meat for one person. In fact, this is how they used to test newcomers to San Francisco. They'd give you one of these, and if you finished the whole plate, they knew you were worthy. In fact, they had a saying, if they don't finish the toast, they'll never make it on the Barbary Coast. So I tried to stay true to the original amounts, so feel free to share, but a real San Franciscan could polish this off no problem. But anyway, enough about portion sizes, it's time to go in, and that right there is an amazing breakfast, and an even better lunch, and maybe best for dinner. Certainly substantial enough, and unlike most scrambles, quote unquote, this is mostly meat and vegetables, with just enough eggs to bring it all together. And of course, if you lose the sourdough, this would be perfect for you paleo people. I mean, look at that. That'd put some Fred in your Flintstone. But anyway, there you go, Joe's special. While it is true there was no such guy as Joe, I think if he did indeed exist, and were alive today, he would agree with me that you should totally give this a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.